Last week you saw Richard and I painting up components we'd cleaned up for the car. Well, this week we're actually got the rear suspension already on, and hopefully by the end of today we'll have the engine, gearbox and all the front suspension in at this end. But let's go to the back and see how we got on. Thankfully, everything does line up exactly as it's meant to. What we did find though was that the chassis had closed up a little bit at the mounting points, and it just needed a little gentle persuasion to get everything to slot in nicely. Not a major problem though. One of the first jobs we had to do was fitting the steering column here, and 10 years ago on a kit of this price you'd have had all sorts of problems with holes not lining up, not even being drilled quite often, brackets not being fitted, but in this case absolutely perfect. All the holes were perfect. They've been laser drilled on this particular chassis, and I can't emphasize enough, on your first build that is priceless. You don't want to be messing around with having to work out how things fit, where they go. This was absolutely perfect. Okay, the one area we have had a slight niggle was on this strap here for the fuel tank. We actually found that the hole that was drilled originally in the chassis was too far away to fit the lip of the petrol tank. So what we've done is we've drilled a second hole. It's the only time we've had any problems with the holes that have been drilled into the chassis, and apart from that it was no problem at all, but it was a bit of a nuisance at the time. There's a little rubber bush on here that, believe it or not, stops the car changing gear on its own when you're driving along. And you had to weld on a little bracket here. Now, I can't help wondering whether the guy at home without his own welding kit or even any interest in welding is going to cope with this. But that's just one of the things you've got to do, because it doesn't fit the Jester as it is. Okay, one of the things we've been told to do with this kit is to actually cut a coil off the old spring, clean it up and put it back on. Well, Specialist Sports Cars has supplied me with some pre-set springs that fit, and I recommend if you can get hold of it, that's an awful lot easier. Nice to actually sit in it for a change. Just to illustrate how good this chassis is, this is one of the front suspension arms, and it corresponds perfectly with the holes pre-drilled in this chassis. Now, 10 years ago you couldn't even hope for that, so it makes the build an awful lot easier. It takes days away from your work. Now, no matter how good the chassis is, you're still going to have to make a few brackets up, like this one for the brake pressure control valve, and they all add time to your build. With the rear suspension bolted on, we can now take the front of the chassis off the blocks as well. Now, the most expensive wheelbarrow you'll ever see, we have to lift the chassis over the engine and gearbox, lower it down, and then line up the engine cradle mounting points. Sounds a bit of a mouthful, it's even worse to actually do it. As with any kit of parts, you always get that little bit left over. It was down the back of the engine somewhere. Do you reckon I'll miss it? Go on, where was it then? Let's have a look. It's down there. Nah, you'll never miss that.